We wanted to talk about that Variety article from a couple weeks and sort of give sort of our diagnosis on the current state of the MCU because, as you might know from the Marvels box office, the MCU is not doing too hot right now. The Marvels is really crashing and burning at the box office, so we're going to start off talking about some of the conditions that have led to where we are now, why that happened, and where they can sort of go from here. So let's get started on that, Niles. What do you got to say?
Yeah. And the main article that we're talking about, it's a Variety article. I can't remember the exact day that it was pushed out, but the title of it is Crisis at Marvel. Jonathan Majors, backup plans, the Marvel reshoots, reviving original Avengers, and more issues revealed. So that's the article that we're referencing here, and it is a fascinating read. You know, it's really kind of highlighting this current direction of the MCU in 2023, and some of the information in there is kind of out of date by now because it was more talking about like the lead up to the Marvels, and it was expecting it to be a box office failure, and lo and behold, that's
projections were very low for it, and those projections ended up being accurate, if too optimistic. I would say it dropped like 77% week over week. Which is really bad. Just getting ahead of myself a little bit, but like, I don't think this movie is failing because of itself. I think it is a lot of the stuff we're about to talk about that has led to this. A lot of what's in this article is stuff that we've been saying on this show for years.
Yes.
Like, we're big fans of this franchise, and I think we've reviewed every MCU movie at least relatively positively, but a lot of them, the longer I've had to sit on them, the less I've enjoyed them. Thinking of Thor Love and Thunder, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, Secret Invasion immediately left a bad taste because it's real bad. But I'll jump back to you.
We are kind of prophets over here.
We are.
We've been making these like kind of statements about these movies and like what we think needs to happen to like fix it. Go back and watch the tapes. You can see it. We're talking about it, but it's kind of like a lot of this. What this article is talking about, this Variety article, it talks about like these concerns that have been popping up within Marvel, that there's kind of this these quality control issues with the content. I think especially when they were launching Disney Plus and with the pandemic and everything, they needed to kind of shift a lot of gears and think about how they were going to produce things after Endgame, after 2019, which is kind of this peak of Marvel. And with kind of theaters shutting down and all this stuff, it's like, well, what do we do? And I know that's not the entire story there, but they just kind of put a lot of emphasis on these shows and these series and putting this stuff out, producing a lot of projects.
Basically, the mandate was like, there will never be a time when there is not a Marvel property on air. That was a big part of just, in general, the industry was doing this massive push to streaming, and to justify a subscription cost as a user, like, there needs to be new content on the platform, right? You're paying for that sweet, sweet content. And so they have to always have something coming out, and their flagship brands are Marvel and Star Wars, so they were going to milk them as much as they could. And
to death.
And some of this is like the chickens coming home to roost, speaking specifically about the exploitation of the VFX workers that got so bad that they started a universal call to unionize, which has rippled out through the rest of the industry, which is really wonderful to see. But someone's quoted in the article talking about like the problems with the Marvel's bad VFX and how expensive they are is it's not a visual effects problem, it's a pre-production problem, it's a scripting problem, because Marvel has and they've had a history of doing this, and they've apparently been a notoriously shitty client to work for a long time. The way it's supposed to work is you write a solid script and you storyboard it out, and you're supposed to kind of know what the shots are for the action scenes, and then send those shots to the previs teams, and then they are making visual effects for those specific shots. The way Marvel's doing it, it's like, send us a bunch of. It's like a shitty client who's like, well, I don't really know what I want for my logo. Can you just send over like 15 variations and we'll work from there? It's like that. So that's a big problem, but also the quantity over quality. There is a point of diminishing returns, both financially and creatively, after which, like, what you're making can no longer be good. You can only put out so many good things at a time, otherwise the quality will drop. And also, I think they're just asking too much of general audiences. Like, multiple movies and seasons of TV a year is too much for your average person to keep up with. And that is why this is all falling apart. Because the appeal of it for so long was the interconnected narrative. But now to enjoy that, it has to be like your job, keeping up with the MCU.
Yeah, right. Like you see those memes online sometimes. It's like 20 years from now explaining to my kid, you need to watch like 7 years worth of MCU content to be caught up for this movie. And it's like essential viewing. It's like you can't expect audiences to do all that legwork. You can't expect everyone to have watched all of this,
right?
These decades of content. It's just too much. So yeah, I think like we've talked about it before. The MCU just really needs to like take a fucking breath, to take some time to slow down and really focus on honing their craft a little bit more. And like obviously they want to make money, and that's fine, but you can't do that if your films and your series don't have the legs to get you there. You need to give it some time to breathe and give your creators time to actually create, and don't stress them with like this production line.
Right. And I think I've said this cadence before, just like keeping in mind that they're a business that wants to make money. I've said like every year their release cadence should be no more frequent than 2 movies in a season of TV. Like you have movie 1, in the spring, early summer. You can have a season of TV that stretches through the summer into early fall, and then a mid-fall release. You can't do more than that. It's too much, both in terms of asking the audience and the quality and the like stress you're putting on your teams. And also, I think part of their problem now, and that's my most recent YouTube video is kind of about this too. It feels rudderless at this point. Remember back in the day, earlier in the series, where like the post-credit scene would be teasing the next thing that you're going to watch. Like the end of Iron Man 2, Coulson goes to the desert and sees a big fucking hammer stuck in the sand. And that hammer is Thor's hammer, and Coulson is in Thor, which was the next film. And now it's like we have a post-credit scene with Harry Styles, Thanos' brother, going to the Eternals. Are we ever going to see that? We have the Hercules in Thor Love and Thunder.
Yes.
Are we ever going to see him again? Shang-Chi meeting the Avengers. That's another one. We haven't seen Shang-Chi in years, or has he been mentioned in years? No. So it's like, it's no longer like, oh, here's what you're getting next. It's them promising something that may or may not show up 6 years from now.
Yeah, like they're trying to plan, and it's just getting really convoluted and messy with that. So I agree. It's like where are these connecting dots, and like how are we getting there? It's like, here's a scene, maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. We'll see.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the other things too that we definitely do need to talk about. One of the other issues that the Variety article talked about was Jonathan Majors as like the central pivot piece of the franchise moving forward. And
for those who don't know, he's been pretty credibly accused of domestic violence and assault.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I have seen enough to come to the conclusion he absolutely did it, and he should not still have a job at this studio. But
yeah, and I mean, the trial is impending, so we'll see what comes out of that. But it wasn't dismissed. Like, it's going to be happening. Like, it keeps getting rescheduled, which is creating this problem for Marvel of like, okay, we thought we could outlast the storm, and it's like, well, what do we do now? Like, at this point, we keep pushing off these movies down the line and stuff, but like, you gotta address it. You gotta do something with this, because it's a huge PR issue, and it's a huge reputation problem for the franchise. And at this point, it's like, well, what do you do? Do you recast? Do you change directions? And that's kind of what this article is speculating about. It's like, well, what do you do?
Yeah, and again, like, we should emphasize the most important thing at play with the Jonathan Majors situation is not the fate of the MCU. That is infinitely secondary to like the needs of the victim and her getting justice. At this point, it's like Marvel not having taken action reflects very poorly on their character, on the character of Kevin Feige and his fellow producers. It's shameful that they have not acted and addressed this yet. They were just trying to ride out the storm, like you're saying, and hope it blows over. But we'll talk about that more in Loki specifically, because it will get into spoilers for that show. But essentially, I think the one part of the article I take issue with is them calling out specifically Nia DaCosta for leaving during post-production to work on another project. And if they were trying to make a point about Marvel more generally, or blockbuster films where directors leave more generally, okay, that's a fair point. That probably does impact the quality of these films. But she is not unique in leaving a Marvel project after production is wrapped up and post is happening. So singling her out, I did feel was a little shitty. But, you know, that's the one issue I take. I think the article is mostly pretty spot on about the reason Marvel is in this situation.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, there's a lot of points in that article that you and I definitely are aligned on with the franchise. And there was one
just
point
watch
too,
our Ant-Man episode. We talk about pretty much all of that shit in that episode.
yeah. And I remember seeing something online too that was like, that we called out in that episode specifically, how we wanted the movie to end. Apparently, it was originally written in a way where Kang won, and then they rewrote it, or they redid it, the ending, and where the Ant-Man people won. And I think you and I both agree, or maybe it was just me, but I can't remember.
It was both of us,
Yeah, it was both of us, where we said Kang should have won at the end. And that would have been a far more impactful ending than what we got. Called that from a million miles away. But anyways, I agree with a lot of these points. And one of the things in this Variety article too, one of the last things I'll mention is that there's a line where it says it's too late to write or it's too early to write an obituary for the MCU. And I agree with that because you still do have these projects on the horizon, like Echo, which I'm excited for. I think that's going to be great. Captain America, like the next one, Brave New World, I think that has potential. And there's some other projects coming up that I think, there's still a way that they could redeem themselves and bring that quality back to the franchise.
Yeah, I agree. And I do think part of their problem right now is the directionless, seemingly spiraling. It's like I kind of look at the end of Loki season 1, you see the timeline like shattering into all those infinitely multiplying different timelines. That's kind of what the MCU release schedule looks like to me. It's like we're getting spin-offs of spin-offs instead of focusing on a new core cast of characters and building them up the way they did with the original Avengers roster. We'll talk about it more later on, but I'm like, you've teased things that I'm excited to see, but I look at the release schedule for the next couple of years, and those things aren't on there. They are pushed back in favor of something like Agatha, House of Harkness, or Coven of Chaos, or whatever it's called now. And I'm like, I liked Catherine Hahn in WandaVision. Do I need this show? Do I need an Avengers Secret Wars? No. It's just frustrating. But this is going to be kind of a weird episode because we're kind of negative right now, but we're, I think, talking about two things that both of us